Do you see that thing in the sky right there? No, it's not my boom mic. It's Lunar Remastered. GungHo has been quite successful, releasing Grandia, a couple of other titles, and now Lunar Remastered Collection is the next gateway to your RPG drug. Revered by many fans for being one of the most classic turn-based games that you can get, with wonderful characters, stories, and crazy scenarios that will leave you guessing. Well, probably not. It's more predictable than you think. Using the PS1 and Sega Saturn version as a guide, this one allows you to play Lunar on your PC, on whatever console you have, your Switch, and now we even have physical copies of Lunar as well. I'm sorry, Sega CD fans, you're not going to be playing your version here. It's a great way because Lunar is a very expensive series. Aside from a pretty cheap Sega Saturn version, your PS1 copy is going to be pretty expensive both for Lunar 1 and 2, but I think with this collection, a lot of people will be just happy to play this on the go, wherever you are, and it plays absolutely great. And the remaster is actually a pretty faithful adaptation of what GungHo wanted to do to bring the original experience while delivering something new that I think a lot of fans will be pleasantly happy to play. I actually did a port versus port of this a couple years back, so check right here if you want to see that, which I highly recommend. That way you have a better picture of what Lunar is. So a quick synopsis for what Lunar is for a lot of my younger folk who might not know too much about Lunar. It is one of the classic turn-based RPGs back in the mid to late 90s, of a coming-to-age story of a hero who is destined to save the world in his own way, and it was pretty revolutionary at the time, using FMV quality videos, both on the Sega CD version as well as the PS1, to deliver these really nice high-quality videos. The story is pretty rudimentary in comparison to other RPGs of today, but of course you have to remember this was a classic of its time, and its story was quite revolutionary just because it was very intricate with its story design of the time, weaving great characters into the mix, and just a fun, overall wonderful game to play. This might not be as impressive as it was back in the day, but I still think a lot of people who wanted to learn what Lunar is or wanted to go back and not spend too much money can finally spend on Lunar, and I think it's a great, wonderful collection you'll love. Lunar 2 is also very loved and revered, and while I have my personal bias for Lunar 2, mostly because of the dungeons, I'm personally not a big fan of it, I still think it's a wonderful collection, and both people will love Lunar 1 and 2, but biased opinions aside, let's get into what this collection actually does. Booting up Lunar brings up 4 options and of course a language selection, which is very nice to have. You have Lunar 1 and 2 that's selectable, but you also have Classic Mode and Remastered. Right now I'm going to be focusing on Classic Mode and just using Lunar 1 as a guide, because personally I'm not a fan of Lunar 2, so yeah, that's my opinion. Going into Classic also starts the original FMV in its original PS1 240p quality. It really was a wonderful FMV back in its time. To see animation of this fidelity on the PS1, really taking advantage of CD hardware, that was pretty incredible at the time, and now we're seeing that in its original state on Classic Mode. You probably can hear from the voice right now.
Each of our souls intertwine when we do. Instantly we see it, the time to grow and be it, when everything is pinned on a hold.
That we have a new singer that's been replacing the original audio, so that's something that's pretty interesting to see. And if you see every subsequent version of Lunar 1, the intro has had quite a lot of different singers over its years, so I don't think one person will be happy with just one, but just know you are getting a new singer. However, if you just want to go pretty purist, you can go into the menu and change the audio to Japanese and listen to your original Japanese FMV singing, and I think it's a wonderful way to do it. And greeted with the main menu, it faithfully looks exactly like the original PS1 experience, but you do get a couple more options, and I'll delve into that in just a bit. As you're starting up the game and going on your adventures, the game looks pretty much like its PS1 counterpart. It is pretty much in a 4:3 aspect ratio, just like its original, but unfortunately you can't really change a lot of the pixel perfect representation, so if you wanted nearest neighbor on whatever resolution, I'm pretty sure that it already defaults to what it is. It would have been really nice for GungHo to kind of put different options. That way you can actually put the 4:3 to the full top and bottom, or if you wanted nearest neighbor, you can do that as well. But nearest neighbor seems to be default, which I think for most people, myself included, this is fine for classic. If this looks exactly like the PS1 version, it's because GungHo did take its time to make sure this looked exactly like its original representation. You're pretty much going to be playing almost a 1-for-1 of the PS1 with maybe a couple of different amenities, but if your goal is to just play Lunar 1 and 2 the way it was released, this is the absolute mode to play. But let's go into a couple of changes that we'll see in Classic, and some will also be in Remastered. Both Classic and Remastered have a brand new voice acting cast. I know that a lot of people might not like that the PS1 version has been recast, or even the Sega CD at that point. However, you're going to be having a new cast here, and it's very different from Yuri Lowenthal as well in Suit and Silver Star Harmony.
I wonder if Dine stood here before setting off on his own adventures. One day, I too hope to heed the call of the wind, beckoning me to the lands beyond.
For better or worse, you are getting a new cast. A lot of people will not like that, but this will be open to opinion, but I think it does a pretty serviceable job, and even then, its original, I really do feel was nothing to write home about. Nostalgia reigns pretty strong here. Classic also has a bunch of options that you can change, and the most notable one is the CRT filter. And you have 3 filters to choose from, ranging from Sony PVM, a Sony BVM, and a consumer CRT. The masks I think are quite nice, and they look pretty damn good, and it's kind of nice to see a lot of remastered collections these days looking really wonderful. Like, they've really taken time to make sure these masks look pretty good, and every time I'm seeing a collection, I'm seeing these masks represented better and better, and GungHo did a pretty solid job. But of course, for many folks, you might just connect it to a Sony BVM at that point. Of course, if you wanted the background to be pitch black, you can do so, but also put the 4:3 background, which I still also think looks pretty nice here. There also have been a couple of remastered changes more in line with the inventory, which is also reflected in the remastered mode. In the original, when you were managing your inventory, you had a major inventory and you had to give that to different other party members, but now that you have a unified inventory, you can just equip it to whoever you want without an issue, and this is really great, and you don't have to waste time with that. Let me teeter into combat just a bit. Combat feels very intuitive and nice, just like its PS1 and Sega Saturn counterpart. However, like the Final Fantasy Pixel remasters, we also get a speed button, letting you speed through battles, making it much easier to just go through foes and just kind of experience the story. And I really do feel for a lot of turn-based RPGs, especially these days, having a speed mode really makes things a lot easier, makes grinding that much more bearable. Some people aren't the biggest fan of grinding, myself included, so sometimes this really makes it easier to do that. And if you thought that was kind of bare bones for classics, well, it's supposed to be. You're getting the way the game was released back in its day, but now having it on modern consoles and hardware that makes it easy to play. So if you just want the original experience, this, in my opinion, is the best way to play it, no question. But of course, you want to know what the remastered stuff is, and it's pretty damn solid too. I highly recommend for remastered folk who don't really want to deal with the classic look, or really just want to go well and above beyond what the classic has to offer, and this version has it in spades. Of course, we are greeted with the original intro, but I'm pretty sure this intro has also been AI upscaled to kind of fit the new way the game looks, and it looks pretty nice. I haven't really noticed too many crazy artifacts, but I know a lot of companies have been leaning more on AI upscaling, which isn't a bad thing, but it really depends on how it's outputted and how it's done, and I think that GungHo did a pretty serviceable job. It's pretty rare to find AI upscaling doing a beautiful job, but I think it really did a pretty solid job upscaling the original intros and some of the assets into this. And it makes sense since I'm pretty sure that GungHo does not have their source material for a lot of these FMVs and sprites, so this makes it a lot easier. You do have the same singer from classic mode also in here as well, so there's not really much of a change, along with the voice acting group who is still pretty much reprising the same both in classic as well as remastered. And of course, the biggest change here is the 16:9. Taking full real estate of your monitor, this game looks absolutely wonderful in 16:9, and I think many people will be playing it like this, myself included. It's just really nice to play a lot of these older school RPGs in a 16:9 aspect ratio without distorting the backgrounds as well, so GungHo did a pretty solid job with this, and honestly the game looks absolutely spectacular in this format as well. GungHo kind of decided to not really change a lot of the sprites and characters and just stick with the way the game actually looks in its original aspect with a couple of changes. A lot of the character sprites do not look smoothed out, they look exactly how they were before. The backgrounds look very nice and crisp, but still taking the 16:9 aspect ratio. However, there have been a couple of changes with some menu icons, such as the sprites in the menu for, let's say, Alex, and you can tell they've probably been thrown in an AI upscaler and outputted back, and it looks pretty solid and serviceable for what it is. However, for something like this, I personally would have preferred an option that allows you to either keep the way the pixel look for each character looks, or to have a more smoothed out AI look. This is one of the few options I would have preferred GungHo to put, but then I guess at that point, might as well go to Classic. It makes sense not to go for Remastered, so I guess that's why they have those two options. However, the biggest improvement you'll see here is through visual effects. In the original Lunar, you do see a little bit of parallax scrolling with an image of an icicle just scrolling across through the screen in the ice cave. This was a nice representation to feel the coldness and bitterness of the ice cave. But this was also magnified in the remastered section by not only including this section, but you also see snow kind of trickling and scrolling down, also adding to the effect. So GungHo did take time to make sure there were a couple more effects added to this. Battles also have this effect as well. While they do have the original background look, there's also a bokeh effect that you can see right here, where there's a little bit more depth of field, giving that little bit more of a modern touch. Of course, if you don't like any of these FX, you can take them off and you can still have the original look. However, I do like the way some visual effects look, and I don't really see why you shouldn't have it off. I think it makes Remastered look quite lovely. GungHo really decided to go with the visual and audio taste that really enhances these games, but really doesn't sacrifice what introduced them and made them great. This is really a wonderful remaster for many people, for those folks who want to just play Lunar exactly how it came out when it released back in the day, or people who want to revisit a classic but with new eyes, and this is also a wonderful way to do so. I think GungHo really knocked it out of the park by not going too crazy and just giving what people really want. And it's a collection that you should have too. In my opinion, it supersedes both the PS1 and the Sega Saturn version, and this is the ultimate version of Lunar 1 and 2 on the go, on the PC, or wherever you'd like to play. But that's what I think about Lunar Remastered Collection. What are you guys thinking about this collection? Are you going to be picking this up, or do you really feel that the classics is just the way it goes, nothing touched, the way it is? But let me know in the comments, and I think we'll have a good discussion. Thank you guys so much for just taking time to watch the video. I've been wanting to cover this for just a bit because it's just really nice to see that Lunar came out in a nice little collection. I really do appreciate you guys taking the time to see my opinion. Thank you, I really appreciate it, and I'll see you guys very soon.